Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I just played the White Castle. This one is from the designers of the Red Cathedral.
There's obviously a thematic continuation there.
To some degree, although this game doesn't feel anything like that game other than the fact that there are dice involved.
No, but I do like this thematic tie-in of like we're focused on a particular type of building here. And this is the White Castle. This is in Japan, so we're going to a totally different spot in the world. And the castle is on the board. There's the castle itself. There's like the training grounds outside the castle. There's the gardens outside with the nice little bridges. So thematically, this board looks very cool. And the fact that it's divided into these different sections. And you're going to be manipulating these different sections in a lot of different ways by effectively placing dice down in a lot of worker placement spots.
Yeah, in the grand tradition of DeVere games, this is a lot of game in a little box. Yeah. In fact, they went to great lengths this time to make that happen. This board folds up 8 different times.
It is.
It's such a small board when it's all folded up, but it's about an inch thick or more, which I think is going a little overboard. But yes, it is a lot of game in a little box.
And we have these bridges, 3D bridges made with cardboard here that you're actually going to be placing out on some of these locations. And these bridges are going to be filled with dice during the game. You're going to be using those dice like we said. So it isn't just like a gimmick. Like this does have a cool little use in the game as well.
It does. Did they need the bridges? No, but I like it. I like myself some table presence.
Look at that. I mean, look at the round marker. I mean, they did the same thing kind of like with Bitoku. Like DeVere has put in a lot of
I mean, even the player design. The player order markers are significant.
Those cranes, yeah,
I think it's perfectly produced. I don't think anyone could say it's overproduced, and I liked building the bridges. That was nice putting them together. But you guys want to know about the game itself. Like Ryan alluded to, there are dice on these bridges. On your turn, you're going to be drafting one of the dice on the bridges and then using them on a number of different spaces, which are all quite variable in this game and ever-changing potentially. There are 3 different colored dice. You're going to be taking them from the bridges, but you're going to be taking them from the outside edge of the bridges, and depending on player count, there's going to be different numbers of dice. In a 2-player game, put a pin in that. We'll talk about that in a second. You're going to have 3 dice, but with higher player counts, you're going to have upwards of 5 dice. And you can only take from the outside edge. When you take from one side, the lower value, because they're put in ascending order, that die is going to let you trigger off your lantern abilities that you're going to have on your player board. But when you place low-value dice, it does cost something typically when you're placing them out.
Yeah, there's this interesting balance of placing the dice because every single one of these spaces starts the game with a pre-printed die value. That die value is going to be the amount of money that you're going to gain or spend based on the dice you place.
Or the difference of it.
The difference. If you place below that 3, if you place the 1 there, you have to pay 2 coins. But if you place, for example, a 5 there, you would get 2 coins. Now, that changes as people play the game because if somebody comes and they decide to place a 1 value die there, they're paying the money, but you can stack dice on top of other dice. So the next player to come along that places maybe a 5 on there is going to get $4. So you're watching as people place these dice around and you're wanting to kind of capitalize on that to gain money. The real benefit would be if you could play one of the lower dice, trigger off one of your lantern bonuses, and still make money, which could happen later in the round. That's one of my favorite aspects of the game, spoiler alert, is finding those moments because you can add cards to this lantern an unlimited amount. You could make this lantern bonus so juicy that when you take the lowest die, you're getting 5 or 6 things from it, including victory points, including influence on this track. So it's smart sometimes to take the lower die, even when you are paying a lot of money maybe to do so.
Yeah, so what are you doing with these die? Well, you're placing them in those spaces like we said, but there are a few categories of spaces. One is the castle with all of these cards. There's going to be decks of cards that supply the actions that you're going to be able to take. And as you can see here, these tokens are also variable at the beginning of the game. And they're going to let you place a black or an orange die right here, not a white die. So you have to go there with that particular color die. And if you use an orange, you get to do this action. If you use a black, you get to do this action. As you can see, that's variable on all these cards. Yeah. Plus, there are things in the game that let you take those cards and add them to your player board, replacing them with new cards so that the actions are ever changing out there in the castle. Then you've got a couple spaces on the bottom of the board. Over here, this is kind of for, and I say this lovingly, the throwaway action.
When you really can't take another action.
It's the well. You can place as many die here as you want. Its value is a 1, so you can go there with any value basically without paying anything. And you're going to get a daimyo token and a couple variable things as well. And then over here is going to let you take sort of one of the 3 core actions of the game. And the core actions are going to relate back to your player board.
Yeah, the whole goal is kind of to get your people out onto the board. This is how you're going to score points in addition to a bunch of other effects. Now, there are some ways, there are some actions that are going to get you a point or 2. You might get some points off your lantern.
Sure.
But this is the real in-game scoring. That's going to make up probably 90% of your score.
Oh, yeah.
Getting these people out there also unlocks different abilities. And we talked about how the board is divided into 3 different sections. You have 3 different types of figures that are going to go out there. For example, you have this training yard where you're going to place your workers, or your warriors, I'm sorry. Every time you place a warrior, you're paying, but you're also getting something very valuable to do so. And so you can come out here to try to kind of get some things instantly. Whereas over here, this is the garden. You could potentially send farmers over here. And this is almost like an income. They're going to get some benefits at the end of the round, but only if there are still dice left in their bridges. So when you're planning out your gardeners, you're trying to place them in places where you're effectively going to get huge, potentially, end of round bonuses. But other players know you have a gardener there, and they're going to kind of, block you,
exactly.
I think, if they can.
And then there's also the courtiers that move up through the castle. When you bring a courtier out, it starts at the gate, and then you can spend Mother of Pearl, which is one of the resources, to sort of climb your way up. And as you climb up, if you stop on the first level, that's when you get that card. You get to take that card, replace the one on your player board, and then the one on your player board gets added to the bottom of your player board where your lantern action is. So that's going to sort of juice up that lantern action. Like we said, again, that lantern action triggers when you take the low die on any one of the bridges, which can be very lucrative. It was Ryan's in our play. Ryan used that quite a bit. I didn't use it enough. But that's the interesting cycle here. And you can go all the way to the top here where there's no cards, but you can actually claim some one-time significant bonuses, plus the courtiers are going to be worth more points as you climb up. Not to mention, these courtiers they relate very much to how much your warriors are worth at the end of the game as well.
Your warriors score points for having your courtiers in the castle as well. So there is a lot of tie in there. But I want to talk about these cards and why you want them, because this is one of the interesting things of the game. We talked about how you have these different colors here. If you place a die, you get to do all of the actions that match that color. So for example, you get to do both of these. Maybe you don't like that situation. You can move your courtier in there to take the card. You immediately get to activate one of the bonuses on the card, and it comes on your player board and becomes a personal action that only you can use. You'll notice on your player board there are 3 spots where you can place the different colored die, and they relate to these lines. As you get your workers or people out onto the board, you start to get juicier actions here where you start to get more resources, and then actions here. So you actually can kind of choose your action. If you see a card out on the board, especially some of these bigger cards that have multiple segments touching, you could really hammer those and create a really cool engine. But not only that, you're also changing up the board state and you're getting new cards out there. So if there were actions out there that you didn't like, you can actually kind of ditch them and force the game to replace them with new actions.
Right, because some of those cards, there'll be times in the game where you look at those cards and you think, wow, I don't really have a great engine to get those daimyo tokens, and there's a whole bunch of action spaces that require me to spend daimyo tokens. Maybe I'll get rid of one of those to refresh this so that I can maybe get a little bit more out of what you've got going on.
Yeah.
But again, it all kind of comes back to drafting those dice and placing them and taking those actions. And when I say taking those actions, there are 9 of those actions.
There's only 3 rounds in the game, and each round you're only placing 3 dice. So it's tight.
It's very tight. We played the first round, and Ryan picked up the rule book immediately and went, is this 3 rounds?
Well, it's one of these games, and we've said this before, though we'll talk about this a little bit more in the video. 3 rounds is very tight, and this one is not like one of those games where you by the 3rd round you've got 7 actions to take. You're still only taking 3 actions.
Yeah, and it doesn't
on
really.
the 3rd round.
Yeah, it's not a game that it's restrictive, and like Ryan said, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about who it's for and who it's not for. But 9 turns in a game is not a lot, and you're really trying to find ways to squeeze out whatever points you can and really try to figure out where to find your points. Some of them are staring you right in the face. The garden area is literally have a guy on this spot, you're going to get this many points at the end of the game.
Some of the courtiers too are going to get. Yeah.
Courtiers are like that. Less so over here because there's just a little more calculation that goes on when you're doing that over there. Not to mention some of the few points that you can squeak out during the game, literally. And I'm not saying I played well, but Ryan, where were you? You were maybe at like 7 points at the end of the game.
I was at 9.
9 points. I was at 1.
Right.
Before end game.
Well, like I said, you're going to get probably 90% of your points at the end of the game. You're going to find these small point opportunities, but actually, let's tie this right into who it's for.
Yeah.
Right. We like to talk about that because there's some people listening right now whose ears have already perked up when you're saying, ooh, only 9 actions. You have to be as efficient as possible. You're trying to squeeze those points from the stone. And how can I get these actions?
If that's you.
Right, and if you're listening, you already know that's you. But this is one of those things where it's like, how do I get the most of my guys on the board? Do I put my gardener out in a spot that lets me put another gardener out during the income phase? Or do I take an action where I put a warrior out that gives me another action that maybe lets me put another warrior out? So you really need to find these opportunities. And when you see them on the board, like there's a lot to look at. But there are moments when you look and you say, it clicks. If I do this, I get to put the warrior out. I get this bonus action. I get to do this. I get to come over to my player board. And I get to collect my lantern bonus. And you do all this stuff. Those opportunities don't just happen every turn. And if you pass on them, somebody else is probably going to take it. So that is going to appeal to those gamers. Like it is, every single turn is like a giant puzzle of all these different moving parts where there is definitely a path where you can score the most.
Yeah, I would say, in fact, that kind of sums up, I think, who this game is for.
Yeah, I mean, you would know if you like that kind of game.
All the things that Ryan just said. On the flip side, there are some downsides to some of what you said, and there are some other downsides I just want to talk about as it relates to who this game is not for.
Sure.
As it relates to what you just said, I do think some of that can lend itself to a little AP if you have a big group of gamers at the table. Those puzzles, there's a lot of different variables.
Yeah.
We already mentioned these cards change. So you're already having to consider like, oh, well, what are the new actions here? And at the first 2 rounds, we didn't see a lot of those opportunities. No. It may have been because we weren't looking.
Well, we were
Maybe we were learning the game, I think.
And I think that's one of the things too, like you are not going to get this game on your first play.
Yeah, so if you want to open a game, put it on the table, and play it and go, oh, I found that very satisfying. I think I got the swing of that. I really grokked it. You're probably not going to on your first play.
Maybe by the end of your first play.
Yes.
Which is where I'm sitting right now. But there are some games I'll say that I'm like, why would I want to play it enough times to get it? This one actually has enough going on for me.
And it's short enough.
And it's short enough that I actually do find myself wanting to play it more and doing better and better and really trying to figure out how to play those levers. But not every gamer is going to want to do that.
Yeah, I would say the box says 80 minutes. I would say at 2 players who have a game or 2 under their belt, that is absolutely easy to do.
Yeah, sure.
Or far less than that. I think 2 players. I think if we played this again, aside from maybe some of the AP that might set in with now the experience that we have, I think we get it done in under an hour.
Yeah, but I do want to say too, and I'm going to mention this now, I don't think this game is great at 2. I don't think it's meant for 2 players. This definitely feels like a game that is meant to be 3 or 4. And it does have a solo mode, and solo's probably fine. The reason I say that is because one of the really cool elements, and I mentioned this earlier in the video, is that when somebody puts a die down, they change the value of that space, allowing you to place a die on top of it and benefit. If they went really low, you can go high and just get a lot of money. Not to mention, you can also just take the action that somebody else took. In a 2-player game, there's no stacking.
No, that is out of the game.
That's a huge part of the game that you just don't use. And also, sometimes there's only one spot on the board to do what you need to do. And if your opponent takes that, you just can't. Whereas in a 4-player game, they might do something sneaky where they put a 6 there saying, I know you want this spot, now you're going to have to pay for it. But you can still go there. And that's a huge part of that deal.
It is a big part of the game. So to sum that up, I'd say if you're someone who likes to play mostly at 2 players, maybe this game isn't for you. It was a decent experience, but I think it will pale in comparison significantly to 3 and 4 players.
There's less dice out. You don't get as many options on your turn. So at 2 players, it feels so restrictive. You've got 3 dice, and if they all roll low, you're in trouble. But in a 5 with 5, you're probably going to get at least 1 or 2 that are on the higher end of the die,
There's going to be more strategy throughout the round of like, oh, you know what, I want to use a black die, but I'm going to wait and see if someone takes this low one, so this high value bumps off onto that side, because we didn't talk about that, but depending on which die is taken, the dice in the middle will slide that way, so then that next die is available.
And in a 2-player game, you've only got 3 dice. So if somebody takes the low one, the other one just shifts over to the low one, and then you're done with that experience. Whereas in a 4-player game, that's going to be happening a lot more, and you can kind of wait and see how other players interact with the dice to kind of grab that one. So now, it's still going to be a very tight, puzzly game at 3 and 4, but at 2 it almost felt punishingly restrictive at times.
Yes, and another thing that felt punishing. And I hate to.
This is the elephant in the room.
I hate to complain about these sorts of things, and I generally don't, because I think putting in the effort to learn a game is something we all have to do as gamers. With that said, one big omission in the rule book is there is no component list. And I know you might hear that and go, oh, who cares? What's the big deal? I can tell you, I've read myself some rule books in my time. I've learned several games. This game was pretty frustrating for me just to set up. The learning of the game and how it plays, that was fine.
It's okay.
But the setup had some... The setup was just referencing a bunch of stuff that I had no way of knowing what it was.
That's the part that bothered. When you start going into a game and they're like,
place these in this section.
Place the Dymo seals here. Place,
I didn't know what
the
these
decree cards. Yeah. And you're like, what? Show me a picture of what a decree. There's like 6 decks of cards. Which one of these is the decree deck? Which one of these is the level 1 deck? And there isn't a board example, but
there's a little bit of a board example.
But they don't really show what any of the components look like. So you are left kind of having to guess a little bit, or just kind of use your own common sense. But still, you shouldn't have to do that. Like, why would you not have that? Plus, they don't ever define some terms. So you might get to a point in the rule book where you're like, what is that term? Like, what are they referring to when they talk about like these tiles or whatever?
Yeah, and let me say this. It is a challenge to put together rule books. And sometimes some games it's challenging to figure out, like, what do we need to say first and this and that. But I would say never omit
the components
list with pictures of the components. It made it very challenging. And like I said, I don't generally complain about this thing, but this one was a doozy in that respect. And again, it was just for setup. It doesn't affect the gameplay. But I will tell you, as a gamer, and I'm sure all of you can relate to this, when you're learning a game for the first time, it has an impact on the overall experience.
Especially if you're not a hobby gamer. If you're not deep in this hobby, and you're just trying to learn, and you're trying to set this game up, and you're just like, I can't. Like, there's almost a point where David was like, I want to throw in the towel. I just don't understand what they're referring to. And that's the thing that can be fixed. I mean, they can put this up online. They could, let's just show us what the components are, what all the cards are, what all the pieces are.
But if you want to put in the effort, and I know most people do, the game is worth trying. Like we said, I think a 3 and 4 player game is where you should 100% probably
best at 3 and 4.
Start with this thing, and then maybe try a 2 player to see how it fits for you. But I think the game does excel much more at 3 and 4 players. But anyway, that is the White Castle from Devere. If you have any questions about it at all, please make them in the comments below. If you want to talk to me about rule books at all, please make them in the comments below. I will try not to be the old man on the front porch.
But,
yes, there are great examples. Anyway, let us know everything you want to know in the comments below. And until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.